All right, next presentation. You are going to hear from two brilliant grazers and land managers. They have impressively long backgrounds with the land, the forests, savannas, prairies, experience both managing and researching livestock. So we are really going to learn something today from Brett and Cherrie. But first, you get to hear about me. So if you don't know me, I'm Julie Hager. I'm the grazing specialist with Savanna Institute. I'm based out of southwestern Wisconsin. And I do plans and designs for anybody that wants to rotationally graze amongst trees. So it's a great gig. And I've had a little funny life trajectory surrounding the subject we're going to talk about today. And it's not really a trajectory. It's more like a toddler's drawing with scribbles. It's kind of how my life has gone with where I've gotten to this point today. In this position, working with people who manage graze, I started out in college wanting to be a vegetarian to save the planet. And then I ended up becoming a meat eater to save the planet. I've been anti-cows in the woods, anti-cows in the streams. I've signed people up for programs to get those cows out of those places quite proudly. And now when I drive through the countryside in this state and all over the country, I look around and I see such opportunity to put livestock in streams and idle land that's just screaming for trampoline and manure to make it better. And you might ask, why did I have this shift? And it is a long discussion, so I'll spare you and I'll just summarize by saying I've realized that it's all about the right human manager who knows both the land, who knows both the livestock behavior, and they have the ability and fortitude to use those skills to complement the natural ecosystem processes. So yes, there's a challenge to restore our land. And farmers have accepted this challenge. So I feel quite honored and privileged to learn from these land managers, raising their trails into this orchard landscape of goats, sheep, and cattle. So with that, I'll let the presenters introduce themselves and we'll take it from there. Yeah.
I was told I had to sit at the table, but I much prefer to stand and hide behind the podium here. I'm getting over some sort of a sniffle and probably sound like I'm choking and coughing a lot, and I brought my water, so we're gonna the plan is Cherrie and I are each gonna share a bit of our story and some images from what we do for about 15 minutes each. And that means we have ample time for a good group conversation, all the burning questions that come up or thoughts and comments. We're going to talk about them today. So with that, I'm going to get into the part that I want to share with you. I'm Brett Chedzoy. I'm a regional extension forester with Cornell University. Anytime that I have the opportunity to talk about my two favorite topics, which are grazing and forestry together, I'm at my happiest. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our farm, some other farms in our area. I have to start though by saying that I thought it was very interesting that neither the title or description for this session used the word silvopasturing once. And there, I've said it now. I put it on my title slide. But in essence, that's what we're going to be talking about today is silvopasturing and its many forms and its many beneficial uses to deal with healthier farm woodlands and landscapes. All right, we've already managed to. There. Arrow keys work too. I'm going to start this morning's conversation with this question here. This is a view from my neighborhood over in the Finger Lakes region of New York. Our family's farm is in Watkins Glen, New York. Many of you've probably at least recognized that name for the car races and all the wine country and all the good things. Steve did a really nice job this morning of introducing our little place called home. Our farm's about barely 20 minutes door to door from Steve and Elizabeth's farm. And this landscape here, you could probably look at many of the areas where you live and work and expect to see something quite similar, where we have this mosaic of farm woodlands mixed together with fields and pastures. But ask yourselves, how much of that woodland is really being used to support the viability of that farm? And in what condition are those farm woodlands? I think I figured out the problem. I think I was just hitting the wrong arrow thing on the clicker. So I think Sean made the quote at the conference yesterday morning when he said lawns are stupid. And I hope he puts that on hats and t-shirts eventually to help with his fundraising. They make great gifts for my grazier buddies. From a forestry perspective, that lower image there is also stupid because we have the tools and the know-how and the rationale to fix that, to make it better and shift it more towards that image in the upper picture. And I'm glad that Julie mentioned in the introduction the reason why we see that image in the lower corner. I'll come back to that in a moment. But whatever your objectives are, whether it's carbon or healthy and valuable and productive trees or habitat or soil health, water quality, or all of those things and more, I would say now that that image in the upper corner there gets us much closer to achieving those things than what's in the bottom, which is a very typical condition for farm woodlands in our area. Basically, the punchline here is that disturbance coupled with selective browsing from deer, and anywhere east of the Rockies, you're talking about primarily white-tailed deer. You get out in parts of the West Coast, it might be elk and even moose in some areas, but basically hoofed ungulates that go through and selectively browse the types of plants that we want to see more of in our forest landscapes and ignore other plants, many of which came from somewhere else, the so-called invasives, but it can be native plants as well that get out of whack with the natural ecosystem, and they start to take over, so to speak, because what happens here is that Bambi walks around and an adult deer will eat about 4,000 seedlings, hardwood seedlings a day on a year-round basis. So they're continuously walking through, taking a succulent bite off of the baby oaks and maples, and meanwhile ignore the multiflora rose, which is what you see in that picture, or other invasive shrubs or native plants, ferns, ironwood, striped maple. And those plants become taller and eventually shade out everything else and occupy that site for, it can be for a very long period of time, decades, until we do something about it. So I'm going to divert for a brief minute here and talk about one of the things I think is related to this morning's conversation that I introduced myself as a regional extension forester. So much of my focus is on how do we sustain healthy and productive woodlands. New York, like many of our states in the Northeast, is about 2/3 covered with forest land, and we have a world-class hardwood resource in the southern tier of New York, northern tier of Pennsylvania. New York's forest industry is about a $24 billion industry. Nobody outside the forestry community knows or recognizes that, but we're slowly losing, not even slowly, losing that to the ever-growing list of pests, and then trees aging out, and mismanagement and other factors. So in 2016, we stumbled upon this idea of building what we call slash walls. Slash is logging debris that during a thinning operation, you can put it in these solid continual windrow barriers to exclude deer for roughly 10 years, which gives the desirable plants a chance to recover and grow beyond the other competing plants that we don't want to see is necessarily the future forest. And this has been working very well. It's been widely adopted across the Northeast. We create a website there that has a lot of the useful facts and figures, but we can build these for roughly a quarter to a fifth of the cost of fencing. And the beauty is there's really no maintenance if you build it right the first time. So yesterday I sat in on some of the other sessions talking about the challenges of growing high quality berries. I think we're all here for reasons that extend just beyond growing healthy forests back. And this could be a very useful approach, in my opinion, in my experiences, to protect any other sort of horticultural crops, or for planting young trees, protect them in a feasible and safe way. So it also deals with a common problem when we do thin silvopastures, and that we have a lot of logging debris that we need to consolidate and leave that ground clean so that we can use the livestock workforce to go in and effectively manage that vegetation, because we kind of lost some of the other options, like hooking on the brush hog or the spray tank and going out there and fixing our poor grazing management. The lower right-hand picture there, that's work being done by a landscape architect friend of mine, Jonathan Farber, over in Eastern New York, where they're building small slash wall exclosures within silvopastures in areas where they want to basically start the new generation of forest that's going to grow on that site and sustain the silvopastures hopefully forever and ever, and also allow some of the biological diversity to recover inside those slash wall areas. So just a short infomercial on slash walls, and to give you an idea of how we can, because we can easily fence out our livestock, but fencing out deer is more challenging. So we think slash walls is the best answer that we know of today to do something about that. So this forester's experience with silvopasturing started about 33 years ago when I was in the U.S. Peace Corps and had the good fortune to work in central Argentina with large ranching operations that were very effectively combining large afforestations together with cattle. And you couldn't really do one without the other, because if you didn't graze the landscape, the fuel loads would become too high, and the young forest would burn up in the dry, warm months of the winter. And the livestock thrived under these silvopasture areas where they had more respite from the weather extremes, and you would find more cool season grasses and forbs growing in those better microclimates. So it was just a all around win-win, and I became enamored with this. I met my wife, Maria Jose, and we got married in 1994. The day before our wedding, I walked into the land lawyer's office, plopped my life savings down the desk, bought our own little piece of paradise there, and 30-some years later, that continues, thanks only to some really amazing people there that keep it moving forward. And someday spend more time there, but we get down about once a year. And one of the reasons I like to go, of course, is I know you're all counting how many sides of beef are in that picture. That was a friend's celebratory cookout. They call them asados, when they won the World Cup in Argentina. And you have no idea how much red wine went with that beef. A lot of things to like about their lifestyle there. We After living and working for years in Argentina, after the Peace Corps times, we moved back to where I grew up in the Watkins Glen area of upstate New York in 2002, and started to take a hard ass look at what our farm woods look like. And these are all pictures here. Nearly all of the pictures I'm sharing today, the good and the bad and the ugly, come from our farm. And we had, so this is like typical of where we are. And the one of the neat things about our farm is we have over a mile of frontage on the Watkins Glen State Park Gorge. That's apparently New York's second most visited park in New York after Niagara Falls. And everything on our farm, of course, drains into the gorge and 2 miles downstream into Seneca Lake, which is the heart of our Finger Lakes wine country. So much of what we do is aimed at trying to protect that very special watershed, but really the guiding principle for our farm is those are kind of my thoughts there of keeping it to be something that our children will gradually come back to, and their children, because farming is a sacrificial labor of love. I don't care what kind of farming you do. And, we all have our good reasons why we do that. But much of what we do today, frankly, would be for naught if it ends with the current generation. So I don't have a magic formula or silver bullet to share with you today, how you keep it fun and worthwhile, meaning Steve made a comment this morning about measuring things only in economic terms. So, profitability is part of that, or you run out of money at some point or burn out. But that's not really, for us, the silvopasturing is key to achieving that very important but somewhat elusive goal. So when we came back, this is what a lot of our farm woodland understories look like, and it's not always just the non-native invasives. We have a lot of native plants too that can become very problematic. In that case there, it's beech brush, but it can be ironwood, it can be fern, it can be other plants that thrive because the deer largely ignore them. And that lower picture on the right is European buckthorn and privet and barberry and multiflora rose and honeysuckle and bittersweet. And it's like, you name it, we grow it, and still continue to grow a lot of it. But the silvopasturing over the past 20 years has really helped us reduce the amount of that. So the inspirations from my early experiences in Argentina combined with this project here, this was ramping up at Cornell's main teaching research forest, the Arnott Forest, where I now work part-time as the forest manager. And it was a SARE-funded project to look at the effectiveness and cost-effectiveness of using goats, which is going to be much of what Cherrie's going to share with you. According to mine, I had like 1 minute left, so you should have just let me. Okay. This project, though, was what I would give credit to us, really what became talking about silvopasturing a few years later, because everybody remembered the cute cuddly goats running around eating the bad plants, and a lot of that work was focused on our sugar bush areas, but there was an expansion where they got to test goats out in a variety of vegetation management contexts, and it all seemed to work well, especially when you had a nice labor force of college students to move electronets and goats around. And but in essence, it was mob grazing with goats in the woods. Like, Cornell was way ahead of the times. I mean, this was before we talked about mob grazing or silvopasturing. But So taking, again, what I had seen and learned from that, as well as the earlier experiences in Argentina, where for every Argentine rancher, it's just like, well, why wouldn't we grow cattle and trees together? They're very pragmatic farmers. I've never met somebody in Argentina that I would consider like a hobby farmer. It's just like they're all in it for the long term, but they realize they got to take care of their land, but they got to make money at it too, to for it to support their family for generations to come. So we set about doing a variety of both like commercial thinnings and pre-commercial thinnings, as well as using our livestock to both browse and trample plants. And I hope it comes up in the discussions afterwards. Mob grazing doesn't work particularly well in silvopasture settings. There's just too many barriers on the ground that you don't get that nice uniform smashing down trampling that you would see in a treeless pasture. But we can get into the dirty details of that comment later. And keeping that in mind, the using livestock to our advantage doesn't just end with the end of the growing season. We really strive to use our animals to get the most good from improving our woodlands and silvopastures year round. Bale grazing is one of our favorite approaches to doing this. Anytime that the ground conditions are suitable, meaning relatively dry or relatively frozen, we try to feed some portion of the roughly 1,500 large round bales that we feed our large cow-calf operation every winter. In silvopastures, that term bale bomb, that I first heard a Yale forester friend, Jory Fiche, use that. And I think paints the right picture, where you're plopping the bale in the middle of the patch of soft brush and if you do the math, putting 20 hungry bovines around that bale, you get about 1.5 million pounds of density per acre in that 30-foot diameter impact zone. That's far more than we can achieve with regular mob grazing. And you get the fertility and seeding of benefits to boot. So, and you can roll bales out if you prefer. You're going to get less density, but spread the impact out more. So if we do enough of these right things at the right times and use our senses to do adaptive management, we can gradually shift things into a scenario that looks more like this image here, where we can have our cake and eat it too, or at least our livestock can eat it. And notice I say gradually because as a forester, when I started talking to farmers, I realized like farmers want things to happen in 5 months and foresters expect them to happen in 50 years. And, agroforestry is a hybrid system where I think we both have to recalibrate our expectations a little bit to be somewhere in the middle. It may take years to really start to see the positive results that we're seeking, and it could take many more years to really achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. But I think we're all capable of getting there. So finally, I would be negligent as an extension educator if I didn't tell you a little bit about where you can learn more about everything we're talking about this morning. There's way too many good silvopasturing resource sites out there to try to name them all. Just doing a search for Cornell silvopasturing will get you to the 3 main sites that we've created, one of which is this forum here that we started in 2011 just to keep all of us that are excited about silvopasturing network together. And we use it mostly just to promote events that happen. A couple examples there that we've done over in our area in the last couple of years. I always twist Steve's arm to put his stuff there. And I know you're not going to sit on there at night and post lots of content or read everything that's on there, but we need a way to share what's happening out there. So that's till somebody comes up with something better, and more power to you. That's one of the things we like to use. So going to turn it over to Cherrie now, and then we'll dive into all the things that are on your mind.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Brett. I appreciate being invited to talk with you guys today about Silvopasture and what we've been doing here in Wisconsin. To give you a little bit of background on me, I'm Cherrie Nolden. I'm not going to go through all this, but generally I grew up in Wisconsin, but also in Kansas. So my family farm, my grandparents had a farm down in Kansas. I didn't inherit any land. I grew up on a 5-acre hobby farm and was in 4-H and FFA and showed little animals in the fair, and really enjoyed the Nature Space Project and wildlife related things. So ended up pursuing a bachelor's degree in wildlife ecology at UW-Madison, finished that, and did some research on grassland bird ecology, predators of grassland birds, diseases of the predators of grassland birds, and consumers of deer carrion, especially chronic wasting disease, and a little bit of Johne's disease research too. And then I got a position with the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks doing farm bill coordination. So I moved to Kansas, and I had bought 10-acre farm here in Wisconsin before moving to Kansas. So kept that, moved to Kansas, sold the 10-acre farm, bought a 200-acre farm down in south central Kansas, mixed grass prairie, and the clay farm that I had previously was replaced by one that had loam soils, and I was thrilled, except there was water issues and near the Ogallala Aquifer, and working in a wildlife organization on farm bill programs and working with farmers and developing programs that worked for everybody gave me a lot of perspectives on things, and that's where I encountered goats. One of the fisheries biologists down there wanted to get goats, and I had had sheep prior to that, and I was like, no, you don't want goats, you want sheep. And he got goats anyway. And then so I was helping him with health related things with the goats, and decided actually I like goats. So I bought some goats down there and brought them back with me to Wisconsin when I moved back. And my husband had the opportunity to buy into the family farm up there. So we moved to Sauk County and Wisconsin, and that was pure sand, 200 feet of sand soil. And so that was quite a different management of pastures and that sort of thing with our livestock there. So I learned a lot with that. I also worked with the prairie conservation groups in especially the Sauk County groups that are focused on prairie restoration at the Badger Army Ammunition Plant and the USDA Dairy Forage Research Center. So I did a bunch of research there, which led into doing a master's degree in agroecology, studying the use of goats for brush control in oak savanna restoration. So kind of combining the background and interests that I've had, and then got a divorce and moved to Dodgeville and started working on a PhD in animal and dairy sciences, studying parasites of grazing goats and cattle. So that was a little bit more of the epidemiology type stuff and immunology and parasite biology, and the biology of the inside of the animal is very similar to the biology of our soils. So it's interesting, the parallels there. And then I didn't finish the doctorate, but I finished the research and all the coursework, which was very useful because I was under a nutritionist, a ruminant nutritionist. So I learned a lot about nutrition then. And so then I went to farming full time. So now I'm full time as a farmer. My husband is also full time on the farm, and we just keep doing our farming things, and are interested in testing out how we can achieve more of our conservation objectives while also being successful financially with raising the livestock that we have. So that's part of why we do what we do. So this is from my master's degree research at the Blanchardville DNR-owned Yellowstone Lake Wildlife Area is the name of the property, and putting 110 goats in electronet fence for 3 days, and enclosing 1.5 acres, we were able to get them to take the vegetation that they can reach, which is up to about 6 to 7 feet above the ground, down to about 6 inches above the ground. They don't like eating closer than 6 inches to the ground. So it's really nice. You can apply goats in a way that's different than applying cattle or sheep, because the sheep will eat that and the cattle will eat that grass very close to the ground, whereas the goats don't want to. They leave that alone, and that forage preference of goats and behavior allows the goats to create a different effect on the vegetation than the sheep and the cattle provide. So currently, we have about 150 goats, about 150 sheep, close to 50 small draft horses. I've bred them for 33 years. 2 donkeys that we were given. I wouldn't otherwise have them. 7 adult livestock guardian dogs and some puppies that we're training. 2 herding dogs and about 10 layers. And this is a portion of our goat herd getting ready to move into another section. My husband and I we have lots of dung beetles on the farm. I've documented 14 different species of dung beetles because we manage our goats, sheep, and horses organically. So we don't need to use chemicals on them, and the dung beetles thrive. And the property that we bought has all kinds of open grown oaks on them, on the acres, and we're just working at freeing those up with our various livestock. So here's kind of an outline of the property that we have. This over here, the 50 acres, is our base farm, our home farm. We bought that in 2014. And then in 2017, we bought 80 acres of basically degraded woodland. It was not high quality trees above a stand of invasive species. So the land that I'm going to focus on today is this area. We do rotational grazing up here. Here you can see our rotation from second rotation this summer for horses and sheep that we did up here. And then this area, I've been experimenting with something which is set stocking goats instead of rotating them. So this is very hilly, really tall ridges, deep ravines, and invasive brush everywhere. Oops, go the other way. Also, this is our farm here, and this is Blue Mound State Park, and it's 9.88 miles between the two of them. If you look, like Brett had said, our landscape is pretty similar to what Brett was showing, with an interspersion of small farms and woody areas and open areas. And from our farm, this is Blue Mound right here. This is our pasture. Bald eagle flying out of one of the dead cedars on the farm. But we can see Blue Mound from here. And interestingly, back in 1766, which was 258 years ago, one of the primary recorders of what was in this landscape at that time was visiting with the Sauk Indians that lived at that place at that time. Jonathan Carter is his name, and his description of Blue Mound, the natives took him up to Blue Mound, and from here he stood there and he said he had an extensive view of the country. For many miles, nothing was to be seen but lesser mountains, which appeared at a distance like haycocks, they being free from trees. Only a few groves of hickory and stunted oaks covered some of the valleys. I mean, look at that. 258 years later, we're just quite a different landscape than what it was. And then recently, there was a seminar at UW-Madison that I watched Zoom, and this researcher in the Wildlife and Forestry Department had in his slide set that he's a modeler and remote sensing specialist, that he said forested areas and agricultural plots are twice as large area-wise as the pure forested plots. So farmers in the Midwest own twice as much forested land as the forested landowners, which I thought was really interesting. So a lot of opportunity on a lot of small farms that are not specifically forest farms, but they're agricultural farms with forested areas. And that's, I think, where what I do really fits in and could be of benefit to this landscape and also farm income. So again, showing what we've done with the farm. In 2018, the Google Earth image showed that this was solid trees. By 2020, we had done forestry thinning and removed quite a few of those trees. But around here, unlike what Brett was saying, around here, when you do a forestry thinning, it all comes up in multiflora rose and honeysuckle and buckthorn and autumn olive, and there's no light to the ground. The native trees don't have the opportunity to get established because the brush is so thick and it comes in so quickly. So this is kind of what it looks like. We have down trees everywhere. When we did the forestry thinning, we did not chop up the tops. We didn't pile them either. The deer may stay inside slash piles, but our goats would just use them as jungle gyms. And so we didn't chip it, we didn't burn it, we didn't pull the stumps out, so we didn't need DNR permits to do any of the thinning that we did, which was nice. We tried to thin it to about a 10 to 20% canopy, but we were working with loggers and they did some subcontracting with some folks that thought they just wanted to clear cut everything in certain patches. So there are areas that are less dense and areas that are more dense. And I found this online, which is an infrared depiction of the change in the area over time. So 2017, 2018, 2020, and 2022. And the grayer areas show less dense vegetation and the redder areas show more dense vegetation. I hope those who are colorblind can see that. But anyway, the reason that we bought this land is because we have goats. We looked at that land and we saw, well, that's a tremendous opportunity to raise goats because there's so much invasive woody vegetation. It's not a high quality woodland. We can thin it and the goats will, through their forage preferences, allow goats to, or allow grass and forb cover to increase and establish while also overgrazing, intentionally overgrazing that brush. And so when we think about why we promote rotational grazing, which we do on the other part of the farm and have done. I've done it for decades now. We do rotational grazing to prevent the animals from selecting and overgrazing the species that they most prefer. And so I just flipped that on its head and said, well, goats most prefer brush, and I want them to intentionally overgraze the brush, so I'm going to set stock them. I'm not going to rotate them. I've done research rotating goats, and it's a tremendous amount of work, just like Brett was saying. And when you have so much downed woody debris, it's really difficult to put electronet fences through that. So that's what we've been doing for the last few years. And the reason that works is because goats on 100% brush diet can gain quite well. So these were goat kids in my master's degree research project. 3 years worth of goat kids that we used. Some were Boer Kiko cross, some were Kiko, some were myotonic Boer Kiko mix. And the Kikos had the highest rate of gain with 0.316 pounds per day average daily gain on just brush. No grain, no extra supplements besides mineral and water, salt. So they're very capable of turning brush into meat. And we've done a good job with making money from growing them and selling them for meat as they've thinned the brush out on our property. And the brush is not just food, it's also medicine. These animals are healthier because they're consuming the diverse phytonutrients that are in these plants. And we then as our freezer is full of the meat from these animals that we raise, we're consuming those phytonutrients that have been stored in the fat and the protein of these animals, and they're benefiting. We're eating our invasive species through our goats and our sheep, and it's great. And there's more research happening now on metabolomics and the value of these various compounds in all these species to health of people and the animals. So here's a receipt from an auction. So we sell our goats at auction. I don't like direct marketing. I just like to load a trailer and go. So what I've done here is I've broken down basically 180-day grazing season. Kids are born in May in the brush. We don't have barns. We don't have fancy facilities or anything. They're born in the brush in May. 8 pounds. Generally, we're shooting for about the Christmas sale where we want them to be around 57 pounds. And they'd be 240 days old at that Christmas sale. They need to gain 49 pounds in that time. And so they need to put on 0.2 pounds per day. And if you remember back to going the wrong way here. If you remember back to this, 0.36 is reasonable. 0.24 is also reasonable for putting gains on these goats. So I include this one from 2017 because it's a good example of a basic common amount of money that you get for a goat kid. Like $150 per animal is a really reasonable amount to expect to get from auctions. Sometimes you're going to get 300, sometimes you're going to get 80. So 150 is pretty reasonable. We can support 4 goats per wooded acre in our brush on our farm in those conditions. And so 2 of those are kids to be sold. One is their mother. We keep her for reproduction. So we can produce 2.67 sale goats per acre and basically get $400 per wooded acre eating multiflora rose and honeysuckle and buckthorn, autumn olive, and all that garbage. So looking at our soil types, we have a variety of soil types, and something that I did that I thought would be interesting is kind of backing into the NRCS TSP math for grazers as to what does our acreage actually support relative to what the soil type and yields say about the land that we have here. And so calculating that out with either 150 goats in this 30-acre wooded area or 200 goats in this area. Over the years, we've had a variety of numbers of head in there, and it's been generally between 150 and 200 goats. So generally, we're getting 4.9 or 5 goats per acre up to 6.5 goats per acre as the stocking rate. And again, we're not rotating, so we're not talking about stocking densities. It's a stocking rate season long. Predicted yields based on our soil types would be 1.9 tons per acre for set stocked. And if we did rotate, we could get up to 2 tons per acre based on doing the typical TSP math. So our brush supports less goats than what the soil type, if this was growing forages, grasses and legumes, could support. So, and that's expected. I would be surprised if it was the opposite, just because brush doesn't produce as much biomass per acre as grasses and legumes do. So this is just interesting. We graze them in here, and as the brush gets broken down over time and more grass comes in because the goats don't eat grass, we've overflowed the goats into areas that are here. We have perimeter fence around this, but not around these areas yet. And so we put electronet around these if they're completely out of food and let them browse in one of these areas for a month while this stuff grows back. And talking about protection of trees, this is a multiflora rose bush and an oak growing out of it. And we browsed the goats through here, and that multiflora rose bush protected that tree. Other trees in our silvopasture we have not protected just because I wanted to see what happens. I want to see how this works. And outside of the goat area, this is a dog for reference. The oak regeneration is much greater. So it's kind of the effect of deer, but we don't have the deer as the cause of lack of oak regeneration inside the paddocks. And then since we've been browsing these goats in there for 5 summers now, this is what our multiflora rose bushes look like right now in October, just before I came here. And outside of the fence, there's still green leaves on these plants. So they're defoliating enough to get rid of the multiflora rose. And what they also are doing without us planting any grasses or any seeds of any sort in that 30 acres is allowing this kind of a thatch of grass to grow. And this would be a lot taller if we hadn't put sheep in there. The last 2 years, we've added sheep at the end of the season, and the sheep eat down the grasses quite readily. But if the sheep hadn't been in there, this would be probably 5 times as tall as this. But you can see, we have forest-grown trees that we left as seed sources for regenerating, and the entire ground is covered with forbs and grasses. And then I have a bunch of slides that show what goats do to various species. Autumn olive, I know a lot of people are concerned about autumn olive, but goats girdle autumn olive, and this top will die because it's been fully girdled. So, and they love girdling it. They love eating the plant. They've reached up as high as they could reach to eat that. So they're really effective at that. Honeysuckle is kind of the opposite. If the honeysuckle grows above where the goats can reach, this toupee of vegetation will keep the plant alive, and the goats don't girdle these stems. So what you need to do is go in and cut that off in order to get the growth, basically do a pollard or a coppice, get the growth down to where the goats can eat at it, and then rotate them back through. Another thing to notice in this picture is, look at how much grass is here. This would not be this green if sheep had been run through here. They would have eaten all of this. And this is what it looks like on the outside of the fence where the goats hadn't been. So they did eat some of the grass, but they didn't eat it down as deep and hard as sheep would do. Buckthorn, they girdle buckthorn. There's orange, very orange stem in there minus its bark. They love eating red cedar, and as long as you get them to girdle it below the lowest branches, that dies. Wild grapes, they eat those too. Prickly ash, thistles, multiflora rose, again, smartweed, Japanese knotweed. But they also will do things like this. This is an American elm that they debarked, and that bark is thick. It's amazing that they're able to do that. So this is what we like to see. We like this ravine when we bought this land was completely full of brambles, multiflora, and brush, and now nothing holding the soil on these slopes. And now that we've knocked a lot of that stuff back through browsing and grazing, we have grass on that entire slope. If there's too much shade, we can't get the grass to grow well. So here's one of our Commodore guardian dogs, but this area didn't get thinned out as much as I would like. We need to go in there and thin that so that more light can get to the ground and we can get grasses to grow. And then this summer we had some sheep in hazelnut area, and my husband went to put up the fence, and he didn't recognize that there were hazelnuts inside the fence. And so the landowner called me and said, hey, why is your fence around our hazelnuts? And I was like, well, I will be over and I will fix that. I'm sorry. But the 3 hours that the sheep had access to the hazelnuts, they basically just cleaned up the bottom of the hazelnut stems there. They didn't reach up any higher than that. And you can see the electronet fence on the side here. This is not really even as tall as the electronet fence. So future plans that we have for our place and what we're doing, cutting through that woody debris so we can cross fence, so we can put sheep in there. So now that the goats have knocked back the brush enough that there isn't a lot of brush growing anymore, we're increasing the sheep number and decreasing the goat numbers and moving the goats over to areas that haven't been browsed so much. We'll be adding sheep at the beginning of the season if we can rotationally graze them, rather than at the end of the season where they're not going to do as much damage by overgrazing with a set stocking. We need a water well up there because we've been hauling water. There's no electric or water on that area, and we need distributed water for doing the rotational grazing. We do want to plant desirable trees. So now that we've cleaned out a lot of the stuff that's not desirable, we want to plant desirable trees, protect them, but there will always be goats in the mix here because, those trees will need to be protected and for that reason until they're well beyond where the goats can damage them. But all of the brush that they've been knocking back, if we give it a reprieve, it's growing back. In 3 years, it'll be grown back. So there always needs to be goats in the system if our intention is to keep some of those species out. So like I said, we'll set stock goats in other parts of the silvopasture, plan on increasing the carrying capacity of the land, possibly bring cattle in for knocking over a lot of the dead shrubs and stuff because they're really good at doing that and the goats and sheep really don't do that. And then just keep raising meat on these areas for years to come. And with that, I will take any questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Cherrie. Thank you, Brett. We are going to take questions now. We're opening it to the floor. I do have a few questions already in the queue, so I think I might start off with the first one. Cherrie, you kind of just answered this in one of your last statements, but the invasive species or native undesirable species, we'll believe it that way, and they're on the land, you've been grazing them or trampling them. Do you think those species with your management will ever truly go away?
No, I don't think they'll ever go away. I think there will always be birds and other animals bringing seed in. There's always going to be, they're there because there's a source of those plants in the environment. And although we are knocking them back, they are a valuable forage source for our goats and our animals, but there are other species of woody plants that we would prefer to be in there. So there's always the tension of how much effort do we put into removing things and how much effort do we put into replanting or stewarding new things that we want in there and basically fighting against the stuff that wants to be there versus the stuff that we want there. And it's not actually much of a fight when you think about it from a goat's forage preferences because they like all this stuff. So yeah, it's always going to come back and no matter what tool you use for invasive species removal, it has to be ongoing. And using multiple tools is a viable option too. We could run fire through there and burn up a lot of that downed woody debris, but a lot of that provides the loads and loads of mushrooms that we've collected, just wild mushrooms off of those trees that have been down, and the habitat for insects and herps and small mammals and birds that those provide. I don't really want to burn that up. I'd rather just cut paths through it and rotationally graze through it, and then the goats play on those and really enjoy them. So,
what do you think, Brett?
With silvopastures, we're always looking to optimize what's there, not, it's going to be all grass, all trees, all brush. We got to find the right balance. These are dynamic systems. They're going to look different over time with different mixes and compositions of all those plants. And to repeat what Cherrie just said, like, you're never going to get rid of all the bad plants. You just have to find the way to live in balance with those. We did we call it the Northeast Silvopasture Conference in 2011. One of our keynote speakers was Jerry Brunetti from Agrodynamics, and we lost Jerry about 6 years ago. But Jerry was so influential in our area, and that we recognized during that conference we didn't want to box him into a normal speaker slot. So we put him after dinner the first night. We had all the University of Missouri experts there. Jerry stood up there for like 3 hours. I don't think anybody even got up from their seat to go to the cash bar or bathroom while he spoke. And the very first thing he said is like, the only way to beat the bad plants is to eat them. And I've always kept that in mind. It was like a brilliant statement. Next morning, the University of Missouri experts are all sitting there at breakfast like, hey, were you taking notes last night? Like, because just a very gifted mind to be able to articulate how these herbivores are interacting with their environments. And, you know, I love the different abilities of the different animals too, with the preferences and the behaviors and, yeah, I always am asked, like, what are the best animals for silvopastures? Well, all of them. It's just some are a better fit at different times.
Cool. I think we've got an eager question down here.
Yes, thank you both for the information you provided today. I was curious with the goats and seeing some of the girdling around the trees, how they do with older, well-established oak or birch or hickory.
So we don't have birch in our silvopasture, so I can't tell you what they do with birch. And I haven't, all of the other sites I've grazed with the goats, I haven't had birch in the system, so I don't know. I can't say directly from experience with that one. They don't like hickories. So they'll clean out an entire area of all of the broadleaf forbs and woody species, and you'll see little hickories everywhere growing, and they ignore them. They walk by them. So it probably is the species of hickories we have, and maybe those plants have some extra phytonutrients or chemicals that they use for defense when they're young. Because they do eat the leaves when they're older and falling off the trees. And then the oak trees, usually within 3 to 5 years of an oak sapling getting going, its bark becomes thick enough that the goats can't girdle it. And so, but the nice thing with oaks is they are fire species, so they're accustomed to having, they're set up to have their tops killed off and their roots resend up new shoots if that happens. So if you can give them a 3 to 5 year period of reprieve from browsing or fire or whatever, they're going to get to a level that they're not going to be affected negatively by those events. And every species of tree is a little different in its girdle ability by a goat. And generally I would carry a pocket knife out with me, and if I can stick it in the side of the tree and pull bark down in a strip, that usually means to me that the goats are going to be able to do that too. If I have to like hack off chunks of bark, most likely they're not going to be able to do that. What did surprise me was the big elms, that they really like elm bark, and they eat thick, corky bark that you would think is not. It's just as thick as an oak tree's bark. And you wouldn't think that they'd be able to eat that, but they are able to girdle those trees and eat, and they just chow down that bark as a forage source. It's amazing.
And that preference can depend a little bit on time of the year too, and your mineral supplementation and just many other variables. One of the things I've become increasingly aware of and have been cautioning my friends that are like all in with tree planting to create silvopastures is what I call the one bad day of grazing, where, you know, the sap starts flowing in that tree, or there's some mineral in it as the tree is breaking dormancy. It happens with different species at different times of the year, but you often see it from like mid to late winter through early summer. And the trees that your animals normally paid no attention to, like overnight, they just like go to town on girdling them. So if you got your fancy special chestnut trees or whatever your favorite plant trees are out there, that the animals, you know, and they're up maybe 10, 15 years old and an inch or two in diameter, and you think all is well. Just understand that because they didn't really pay any attention to those trees when they were grazing through there in the summer fall rotation, you put them in there at the right time in the spring, and you're going to lose a lot of bark off a lot of trees. It's going to be really big hoops.
I've got quite a few years of experience with grazing cattle and trees with silvopasture. I've noticed through the years, very specific timing, like you were just talking about, like different times of years, they will eat different things. Do you, looking at the manure that comes out is always a guide, like regeneratively or whatever, that they'd use to tell what the nutrient level is in the cattle. I don't know if it's very representative because of all the other secondary compounds. Do either of you, what would either of you think on that? I guess kind of leaving it open there, but.
We have grazed cattle, and we basically swapped our cattle with horses, and we graze them in the woods and treat them like basically a cow-calf operation, but they're horses, mares, and foals. And the manure consistency does change with the types of plants they eat. And if they're eating a lot of elm leaves, they tend to be a little more dry in their manure. The tannins do the same thing. They bind up protein, and we'll see like I typically for our animals have dead oak tree branches and stuff in their winter paddocks. And there's times of the winter when, especially around like the full moon, they will just go hammer oak bark. And then I see parasites in their manure coming out in their manure. And they definitely eat different things at different times of year, and they have the drive to eat those things for various reasons. And I haven't ever had issues where they've overeaten or undereaten such that like they don't get super flushy and really loose manure to a detriment, or they don't get so dry and stocked up that they have colic issues or impaction issues. They eat these plants that are a variety of diversity in their diet without issues, from my experience.
Grazing animals have an absolutely amazing ability to figure out what they need and how to sequence it if we're not forcing them into eating a very limited selection of like maybe just a handful of species. That's one of the beauties that I see in silvopasture systems, is that there's so much more plant species diversity for animals to select from and self-medicate from. And they figure out how to put it all together much better than we can as the grazing managers if we kind of stay out of the way. But the flip side of that is, even though we're seeing here today with very limited time examples of how effective animals can be as landscape managers, we should never seek to starve our animals into eating our target bad plants. And like that goats in the woods study that I referenced, and I suspect in Cherrie's work as well, you're supplementally feeding those animals. In the case of goats in the woods, they were just using a really low fiber ration that was giving the animals the basics of what they needed, but they were craving fiber, which then created that grazing behavior where they stripped all the bark off the target. In our case, it was mostly beech, ironwood, and striped maple. But you don't just throw 100 goats into an electronet paddock and force them into eating stuff that they might be potentially toxic for them or not meet their nutritional needs just because they're have no choice.
Well, and we address that we don't feed any pellets or supplemental feed or anything. We do just put them out in the brush, but they have a mineral buffet. So they have clay in that mineral buffet that they can absorb toxic plants and things that they eat. And they do go around, and there's 18, 20 different mineral options that they have, and they go around and choose what they want. And we have free choice salt and then that mineral buffet. And we've also, if we had boar goats or if we had goats that needed a higher quality diet, then we would need to give them grain or supplemental feed. But the goats that we have, I've had goats since 2008. And all that time I've been selecting for low input type animals. So I've not fed them any grain, and I've selected for the individuals that can perform, keep a fleshy body condition and rebreed back without flushing and all that sort of thing without needing grain or extra high quality forages. And then that matches up with them going out and just eating brush as their sole forage and not needing extra calories from other sources. So, and that really depends on the type of goats that you get. If you get goats from a background where they've been fed a lot of grain and they need a higher quality diet because they're metabolically programmed for that higher quality diet, they need that supplementing in the brush in order to maintain body condition and stay healthy.
Cherrie could talk about goats all day. We've got time for one more question before lunch.
Okay, just quick, like one short question is the region of Argentina that you're working in, and then the other one is with Angus. I mean, if you had to start again, would there be other breeds maybe to look at, especially that are adapted to silvopasture, kind of the mix?
Our ranch is in Cordoba, Argentina, the Sierra Mountains, and it's kind of the western edge of the humid pampa. So I'm glad you asked that second question. Cherrie and I don't want anybody walking away today thinking that there's only one right species of livestock or breed within those species. That what Cherrie's talking about is what I think of as like biotypes. And I mean, the quicker, easier way is to go seek out farms that are already managing in those types of silvopasture systems and starting ahead on their learning curve. But in the absence of the ability to find those farms or those herds or folds, then we need to recognize that not every animal's behavior or abilities or tolerance for some of the things we want them to do is going to be the same. So I've taught a beef cow management course for Cornell for years, and why they keep asking the forester to teach grazing and beef cattle courses, I don't know, but I always tell very first week or very first class, everyone wants to know what the best beef breed is, and I'm just like, well, whatever. I don't care what color they are, I don't care what breed they are, but you got to figure out how you're going to make money at this, and then pick the animal that's going to work for that. We do have a bunch, we call them our white Angus. They're like 7/8 Angus, 1/8 white Galloway. We absolutely love them. They're just super docile, intelligent animals. But I have no favorite beef breed. But I believe that all of the breeds have those individuals within that breed that can really thrive in what you're trying to do.
And if you do want a particular breed, find a breeder who's managing them in the way that you want to manage them. And in the goat world, it's harder. I feel like it's harder to find that than it is in the beef world or even the sheep world. But they're out there, and it'd be great to have boar goats that are parasite resistant, hoof rot resistant, and efficient metabolically, just because they have a nice meaty carcass. But like we just crossbreed and keep anything that has the traits to survive and perform in a low input system.
So I meant when I showed you the pictures of our farm, Watkins Glen, just say if you're ever in the Watkins Glen area, we're easy to look up. And this is a sincere invitation. You're welcome to drop in. But if you show up during calving season or haying season or on herd health work days, you better bring your work clothes along. So see you in Watkins Glen sometime.